Welcome. I'm really excited to show you the 10% method for percent of a number. So you can find the 10%, you can find 10% of any number. It's really easy. You can do it right in your head and then follow these steps and you'll be doing mental math percent of a number like that. Hey, let's have some fun. Let's get into it. 10% of 20. Well, here, that's the whole. Of means the whole, and you're missing the part. So when you're missing the part, you do the percent times the whole or the whole times the percent, community of property for the percent equation. So 20 times 0.1, well, that equals 2. Now I want you to see something. 10% of 20, the decimal just moved back one place. Okay, so like 10% of 50, what would that be? That would be 5, right? 10% of 80, well, that would be 8. Okay, so we have that established. So 10% of 20 is 2. Now watch this. Watch this, guys. 10% times 2 is 20%. I'll show that. Times 2 is 20%. Now 2 times 2 is 4. So 20% of 20 is 4. You see how that worked? So first you find 10% of 20, which is 2, and then 20% is just double what 10% was, which is 4. Cool? So let's do 40% of 20. Now 10% times 4 is 40. So 2 times 4, kind of like a ratio table, 2 times 4 is 8. Hey, look at this relationship. 20% times 2 is 40%, and 4 times 2 is 8. So 10% of 20 is 2, and 40% of 20 is 8, using the 10% method. Now let's do 90% of 20. Well, 10% times 9 is 90%. 2 times 9 is 18. Therefore, 90% of 20 is equal to 18. Now, can I throw a curveball at you? Watch this. What if we did 15% of 20? How could that possibly work? Because 10% was, to 20 to 40 to just multiply by 2, multiply by 4, multiply by 9. 15%, not so much. Well, any ideas? What's half of 10%? Well, that's 5%, right? So 5% of 20 equals, well, 10% divided by 2 is 5%. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Therefore, 5% of 20 is 1. Now watch this. 10% of 20 is 2. 5% plus 10% is equal to 15%. 1 plus 2 is 3. Therefore, 15% of 20 is 3. All right. Welcome to today's math lesson, percent of a number part 2 using the 10% method. Now this 10% method, this is awesome to use. Let's get right into it. So 10% of 50 is what? 10% of 50, well 10% of 50 would be 5. You just move the decimal back one place because 0.1 times 50 is 5. Now, watch this. 30% of 50. Well, triple 10% and you get 30. So 10% times 3 is 30%. And do the same with 5. 5 times 3 is 15. Therefore, 30% of 50 is 15. Well, if you have to find 80% of 50, first find 10% of 50. 10% of 50 is 5, and 10% times 8 is 80%, and 5 times 8 is 40. Therefore, 80% of 50 is 40. Let's get into some more. Stay with. Do these now. Do 10% of 60, 15% of 60, 20% of 60, and 75% of 60. Go ahead, pause the video while I do a little dance. And let's see, did you guys do it? Well, 60% or 10% of 60 is 6. Did you get that right? Now 15% of 60. Well, I could do 10%, I could do 20% of 60 by doing 10% times 2 is 20%, and 6 times 2 is 12. But what is 15% of 60? Well, did you guys do 5%? So 5% of 60 is equal to, well, 5% is half of 10%, and half of 6 is 3. So 10% of 60 is 6, and 5% of 60 is 3, and 3 plus 6 is 9. Therefore, 15% of 60 is 9. Wonder if, yeah, it looks like a little pattern there. Now, 75% of 60. Well, here's what you would do. 10% of 60 is 6. Now, 5% of 60 is 3. So you would do this one in your head here, and this one in your head here, and use those to determine. So 6 times 7 is 42, that's 70%, and then plus 3 is 45. So in my head, what you're doing is to get really solid at this is 10% times 7 is 70%, and it's a lot easier when you're doing it in your head. It's harder to explain, I think, but this is gold right here. Really learn this. Really practice this at home. I'm gonna put a bunch of practice problems. We'll do them, okay? Stick with me, stick with me. It's awesome that you're learning here when you could be like playing video games or going outside. You have great parents for making you do this. I know it's not the funnest, but thanks for letting me teach it to you. 70% of 60, so 10% times 7 is 70%, and 6 times 7 is 42. And then we have the 5% of 60, which is 3. So 5% plus 70% is 75%, and 3 plus 42 is 45. So that's how we do it. Let's do another round of practice problems. Stay with me, we're doing great. And we're back with some great problems here. Hey, go ahead and figure out 25% of 200. Do that now. Okay, I'll dance. All right, did you do it? 25% of 200. Well, you don't have to necessarily do this one first. First, find 10% of 200. 10% of 200, just move the decimal place back 1, is 20. And now that we have that, that means 20% of 200 is 40. But let's do 5% of 200. Now, half of 10% is 5%. Half of 20 is 10. So now, here's what we do. 10% times 2 gives you 20%. And 20%, I'll just write it, 20% of 200 equals double this, which is 40. Now, we have 40 plus the 5%, which is 10, so that's 50. So 25% of 200 is 50. Again, you do 10% of 200 is 20. Multiply that by 2 to get 40, because that's 20% of 200. And then 5% of 200 is 10, and then 40 plus 10 is 50. Now, let's take it a step further. We're gonna do this with any percent, guys. Any percent. You do it right here in your head. Okay, you're doing great. Keep it up. Are you still here? That's awesome. Hey, what if we had like 73% of 200? What do we do there? Okay, here's what we do. First, you find 10% of 200. Well, that's 20, right? Now, let's get 70%. So 10 times 7 is 70%. 20 times 7 is 140. Now we just have to find out 3%. Well, what we can do is find out 1% of 200. Now, 10% of 200 is 20. 10% divided by 10 is 1%. And 20 divided by 10 is 2. That means 1% of 200 is 2. Okay, now, what's 3%? So 3% of 200, I don't even know if you can see this, but 1% times 3 is 3%, so 2 times 3 is 6. So you really just got to add 6 onto 70% of 200. So 6 plus 140 is 146. And there we have percent of the number. Thanks. What? We have more? Yes. Try these now. Go ahead. Pause the video. Do them now. Okay, I'll dance. All right. Did you do it? 20% of 70. Let's see. 20% of 70. Well, 10% of 70 is 7. And 20% of 70 is double 7, so 14. How'd you do on that one? You getting it, guys? Isn't this cool? This is neat. This is worth the price of watching the video today, which is free. So, I mean, it's life-changing, game changer. 15% of 80. Well, 10% of 80 is 8, and 5% of 80 is half of 8, which is 4, and 8 plus 4 is 12. Therefore, 15% of 80 is 12. 90% of 60. Well, 10% of 60 is 6, and 10% times 9 is 90%, and 6 times 9 is 54. Therefore, 90% of 60 is 54. See how easy you can do this in your head? 11%, 11% of 400. Well, 10% of 400, that equals 40. We just moved the decimal back one. 1% of 400 equals, well, 10% divided by 10 is 1%, and 40 divided by 10 is 4. So for every percent, it's equal to 4. Therefore, 40 and 4 is 44. So 11% of 400 is 44. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video and really learned this, the 10% method. Thanks for watching it all the way through. I hope your family and you stay safe, happy and healthy, and good for you for practicing your math today. My name is Jason Jacobs. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye.